At the age of 24, Ron Haviv shot the photograph that launched his career as a photojournalist. It was an image of a bloodied political candidate in Panama, and it landed on the covers of Time, Newsweek, and U.S. News and World Report. Since then, he has covered the fall of the Berlin Wall, cocaine wars in Colombia, refugees in Rwanda, and political upheaval in Haiti. He was also one of the first photojournalists to cover the wars in the Balkans. His new book, Blood and Honey, a Balkan War Journal, collects some of his most powerful images from his 10 years there. I am pleased to have him here at this table for the first time. Welcome.
Thank you very much. This
is a powerful series of photographs. Let me just begin to show them, and then we can come back and talk about a career. Take a look at this first still, and you will see what we talk about. Here is this. Take me back to the time you shot this photograph.
Well, this was in 1989. Noriega had declared elections to tell the world that he was democratically elected. They held the elections. Noriega lost the elections. He then nullified the elections. The following day, the candidates that won decided to take to the streets to basically get the people out to show that they were upset, that they were ready to put Noriega out of power. And a lot of things started happening, fighting in the streets, tear gas, gunshots, people being arrested. And I was with a colleague, and we decided that we were going to follow the candidates no matter what. We were going to stick with them because we thought if something happened to them, that would be the most important thing. And as the day went on, I wound up being one of the only few journalists that wound up with the candidates at the end of the day. And we wound up at a park surrounded by military. Gunshots were going off, and all of a sudden a group of paramilitary guys come running up a hill with flags and batons and bats and small pistols, and they came charging towards us, guns firing. The vice presidential candidate jumped into a car. His bodyguard jumped after him. The president was able to, the president-elect was able to escape. And they went to the car where the vice president was hiding, and they fired a pistol into the car and killed his bodyguard, who was lying on top of him, protecting him. They then dragged him out of the car, and I was hiding on the street, and I saw this man being brought out, and I didn't even recognize who it was, and I ran over to him and started photographing him. And he was covered in blood, and then somebody had also stabbed him in the arm. So there's blood coming from his arm as well as the blood from his bodyguard. He was wearing a white shirt. And he was stumbling along, and all of a sudden, as I was photographing him, somebody said to me, "Excuse me," in Spanish, and stepped around me. And it was a paramilitary guy. And he took out an iron pipe, and he started to beat the vice presidential candidate as the soldiers watched. And I just started photographing it, And a few minutes went by, and he started to defend himself. And then eventually the army did intervene and threw him into a back of a Jeep and drove off. I was a freelancer for Agence France Presse at the time. So I went back to the office. I gave them the pictures. They transmitted it, and it did very well. I mean, it had a huge impact on policy at the time. It became the cover of these magazines, as well as the front pages of a number of newspapers around the world. And for me, as sort of my first foreign assignment, completely new to it, it was a real introduction into the world of photojournalism, and also into the possibilities of what power of photography can do to inform people and change people's minds.
Okay. He said, "Excuse me," and stepped in front of you?
It's one of these very bizarre scenes that happens quite often in these conflicts.
Excuse me, I want to beat up this guy. Would you get out of the way?
Excuse me, but not like pushing me out of the way. He just stepped around me and then started to fight. And it was a very odd scene, but I can still remember in my head his voice, very, very, very calmly, "Escúpame" in Spanish, and around he went, and that was it.
Okay, the next slide is a Muslim who begged for his life after being captured by the now deceased Archon, being captured by his tigers. Take a look at this. Tell me this story.
This is a scene from the first battle in Bosnia. This is March of 1992. This happened before the first shots were fired in Sarajevo. I was in Belgrade at the time, waiting to do another part of a story, and I got a call from a friend of mine, a Serbian photographer, that fighting had just begun in a small town called Bijeljina, across the border from Serbia. So off we went. The town had already been split in half between Serbs and Muslims. They were fighting. I spent a couple of days photographing the Serb civilians as they were fighting against their Muslim neighbors. On the third day, Archon arrived with his paramilitary troops. Archon had a very well-trained paramilitary group, good equipment, professionals in relationship to everybody else that was there. And I asked Archon, could I go with his troops as they were fighting? And he said, of course, you can go and show how we are cleaning the town of Muslim fundamentalists. So off I went with a group of soldiers, maybe 15 or 20. We went through the town, house to house fighting. We finally arrived at the center of town in a mosque, and they took this man prisoner. And they told me that he was from Kosovo, that he was a Muslim fundamentalist, and that he was shooting at them. And in the soldier's hands, you could see that he's showing me two small pistols, is what the soldier said that this Muslim was using to fight against them. And unfortunately, this man who was put down on his knees by the soldiers, has his hands up in the air, and he's looking at me as if, can I help him? I was the only help that he could have, and there was really nothing I could do at that point except take the photograph. He was then later brought to a headquarters and interrogated, and I was standing around outside the headquarters actually waiting for permission to leave the town, and I heard a great crash, and I looked up, and this prisoner came flying out of the window and landed on the ground in front of me. The Serb soldiers started to kick him, douse him with water, and took some photographs of that. And the next day I went back to the town, to the hospital, where I thought that if he was still alive, he would be there. And unfortunately, I never saw him again.
This is often asked of journalists, and especially photographers. You know, what does that do to you?
Well, it's strictly as, as a human being, it's incredibly difficult to watch anybody die or get hurt or ask for help and you're not able to help them. It's very, very hard. And there have been situations in my career where I have been able to help people in Haiti or South Africa or Somalia, where I've been able to intervene, where it would make sense for me to intervene, that I would be able to do something and I also wouldn't lose my life. But these are all situations that all of us have to decide on a case-by-case situation. And in this case, the soldiers during the whole time had been telling me when I could take pictures and when I couldn't, and what I could do and what I couldn't. And this one was very obvious that there was nothing that I could do.
Next slide is one of Archon's tigers kicking a dead Muslim woman after having killed her during their attacks in the spring of 1992. Have a look at that.
This is from that same situation with the man holding up his hands. This is a little bit earlier. Basically, these are the first people to die by Serbian military force in Bosnia. And what happened here was that at that mosque where they arrived at the center of town and they were pulling people out, including that man, they pulled out a middle-aged man out of the house in front of where this wall is, and they brought him out, and they brought out his wife. And his wife was screaming, crying, begging for them to save them, not to shoot them. Soldiers are yelling at me in Serbian not to take any photographs, not to take any photographs. And the tension level is incredibly high. And all of a sudden, a couple of shots rang out, and the man went down. The woman bent over, took his hand in hers, put another one of her hands on his chest to try and stop the bleeding. The whole time she's screaming. And I had been earlier in the war in Croatia, I had witnessed a couple of executions where I had tried to photograph the situation and had guns put to my head and was told no pictures. And I was so disturbed by that I felt that the next time, if I was ever unfortunate enough to be in this situation again, I would have to try and get a photograph. So as a woman was trying to save her husband, I walked over. There was a truck that had crashed in the middle of the street. I kind of stood by the truck and took a couple of quick pictures of the two of them as he lay dying and as she was trying to save him. And I turned my back to them and I walked away. As I turned my back, a couple more shots rang out, and I looked over and the woman had just been shot. And I walked towards the soldiers. I'm extremely nervous that anybody might have seen me even pointing my camera in that direction. And then another woman was brought out. She started screaming when she saw her friends or relatives dead, and then she was shot and she went down. And I knew that I had at least a photograph of the situation, but I didn't have a picture of the two of them together, the two elements, the victims and the soldiers. And I thought this was incredibly important for evidence. This was really needed in order to prove, without a question of a doubt, that these Serbian paramilitaries had killed these people and that the world should know what's happening because there's still time to act. So I stood in the middle. Most of the troops left. They went off to fight the next battle. And I went to the middle of the street just to get a clean shot of the soldiers walking past the bodies. That's all I wanted. And I framed my shot. And from my left came this soldier with a cigarette and sunglasses. He walked into my frame. He lifted his foot back. I knocked off a couple of frames as he kicked the bodies. I put my camera down. The soldier turned towards me and looked at me. I kind of smiled at him and I said, "Let's go." And he smiled back at me and we ran up the street. So luckily none of them saw me taking the picture. Because I think had they seen me doing that, because tensions were so high, when you're around people that are killing, it's almost like a drug. Anything can set them off, and it's a very, very dangerous, precarious situation for a journalist to be in.
Next slide is prisoners. This is a famous picture of prisoners at a camp in Bosnia in the summer of 1992.
This is sort of a lot of people ask me, oh, how did you get into these camps? It's like, why would the Serbs let you into these camps? And basically the story was prison camps were broken by Roy Gutman and Ed Villamy and stuff like that. And the story became very big. And a few days afterwards, I arrived in Banja Luka, which was the nearest Serbian area to the camps. And I said, can I go to the camps? And they said, sure, you can go. And they took me, they escorted me there. And I was able to take this photograph and several others like it, showing people that had been beaten, that were starving. Very, very strong images, graphic images that reminded everybody of World War II. And my own belief is that the Serbian authorities thought that if they let journalists in after the story was broken, there'd be a big outcry for a week or two. And then people would get tired of it and they'd move on. And that's exactly what happened. These photographs appeared in Time magazine and other magazines around the world. There was a bit of an outcry. A couple of camps were closed, but most of the others remained open. And the story disappeared.
And what does that tell you?
It tells me that in that case, the Serbian authorities played the PR card very well, and they understood that the world attention on this war was very limited, and people didn't want to get involved, even when they were seeing images like this.
Okay. Here is Bosnians dodging sniper fire at a peace rally in Sarajevo days before the war started in the spring of '92. Wow.
This is the...
These things seem framed so well. I mean, is that simply editing, or is that how brilliant you are with a camera?
Well, it's nothing is cropped. These are all exactly what I saw in the picture, and nothing is computer altered or anything like that.
No, there would be that.
But well, I just hope that's just the way that I'm seeing things. Yeah. And this photograph is basically was done on the first day of the war in Sarajevo. They held a large peace rally. The people of Sarajevo, Serbs, Croats, and Muslims, to show that they wanted Bosnia to remain multi-ethnic. And they marched up the street, which became later known as Sniper Alley, and they passed the Holiday Inn Hotel, which was the headquarters of the local Serb party. And as they passed the hotel, the Serbs opened fire from the hotel and started firing on the crowd. And that was basically the beginning of the war.
Next slide. Serbian paramilitaries burned the Croatian flag. This was, what, 91. This is 91.
This is from a town called Vukovar, which was a town of 60,000 people, which was under siege for 3 months. I spent most of those 3 months on the Croatian side until the city was completely sealed, and the only way to go in was with the Serbian military. And this is on the day that the city fell. I went in with the Serbian military, and here they are burning the Croatian flag.
Okay, next slide.
This is also from Vukovar. As we moved through the city, finding different people in different situations. The 2 executions that I saw happened in Vukovar, and this is just a scene from the city.
Next slide.
This picture is actually incredibly ironic. What you're looking at actually is a Serb resident of the Serbian part of Sarajevo putting out a fire set by Serbs. When Dayton was announced, it was announced that all of Sarajevo would be united. The Serb authorities, Karadzic, said that no Serb will live under Muslim rule. But in the Serb part of Sarajevo, there were many Serbs that wanted to try and live under Muslim rule. The Serb authorities then sent in arsonists to burn out the remaining Serbs that wanted to live there. So the whole time, all throughout the war, Serbs were fighting against Croats, Serbs were fighting against Muslims, and in the end it turned Serb against Serb.
Next slide.
This is also from Vukovar. This is a sort of a liberation picture in front of a cross that was destroyed in the center of town. These are two Serbian paramilitaries celebrating.
Next one.
This is a Serbian father and son. The father had fought in this town and decided to take his son after the battle was over to show him the great victory that he had done. His son has a camera around his neck and was sort of taking souvenir pictures of his father. I kind of think of that as sort of a Clockwork Orange-esque type picture.
Yeah, excellent. Next slide.
This is a pretty well-known image. This is Arkan and a live baby tiger. His unit was called the Tigers, and they had sort of taken a tiger from a zoo that they had captured and sort of quote-unquote liberated the tiger. And one day I was with Arkan and asked him for a portrait of his soldiers, and he said, "Oh, great, I have a great idea." And he went outside and he put it together himself.
How well did you know him?
I didn't know him extremely well, but I had met him during several different battles in Croatia and then again in Bosnia. And Arkan was incredibly smart. He spoke 7 languages. He felt that he was truly the Serbian hero, the liberator of Serbia. And he also, most importantly, felt that he could control the media, that he knew when it was best to let you work and when it wasn't. And so when he felt that way, it was quite often easy to be able to work with him because he thought what you were doing was beneficial to him.
And how do you explain his horrendous acts?
I think that he truly believed what he was doing was right. That was
between right and wrong, or right for some political objective?
Right for his sort of place in Serbian history, that he was, in his mind, the great Serbian warrior, the great Serbian liberator, protector of all people, and that anybody that would go against the Serbs would have to face his wrath. And he proved that. I mean, they were responsible, he and his unit were responsible for killing thousands upon thousands of people. And I think also you can add the bonus that his reward was, whenever you took a town, whatever was in the town, the bank, all the money, all the jewelry, all the furniture, everything was his. So if you combine the idea of the great robbery with the great nationalistic patriot, I think then you have Arkan.
And he was killed, assassinated, because?
I think he was assassinated because he was basically a mafia guy, and eventually when the war was over, he was fighting with other mafia warlords
over the spoils of war?
Over the spoils of war. But there's other theories that say that he was killed by Milosevic because he was about to go to The Hague to give testimony against Milosevic.
But you believe the former?
I personally think it was that it was a mafia type thing.
Okay, next slide.
This is another scene of a Serbian victory. The soldier is holding up 3 fingers, which is the Serbian salute for victory, which stands for the Holy Trinity, the Son, the Father, and the Holy Ghost.
Okay, next slide.
This is another Serbian prison. This man, as I was sort of wandering around the prison, he motioned over for me to come to him. He didn't say a word to me, just sort of motioned with his hands. And he stood in the corner. He was very nervous, looking around for any guards that would see the two of us together. And he stepped back in a corner with one shaft of light hitting him, took off his shirt, and motioned for me to photograph him.
What's been the hardest photograph to take?
I think they've all been difficult. I think each one has its own sort of story behind it that is really hindered or made it emotionally difficult to work. I think that all these photographs, there's a lot of sort of legwork behind it, a lot of always pushing commanders and driving through dangerous roads for hours trying to reach places where refugees exist. the whole thing was really difficult.
Taking all the experience that you have, not only in Panama but here, what does it make you want to do? Does it make you want to document war and the horror of war, or what?
Well, initially when I took these photographs, they were taken as news photographs. I mean, my goal was always immediately to inform the world and hoping that people are going to react. I really believe that. When George Bush invaded Panama, he gave a speech to the nation. The first thing he said was, we all remember these photographs from Panama. He used it as one of the justifications for the invasion. So at that time, I really believed that photography and journalism could really play a part in international politics. But after Bosnia, after so many years of myself and all my colleagues telling the world over and over again what was happening and being ignored and the war continuing, I feel that the photographs have a better life as documents, as bodies of evidence, that they will always exist as an archive to always tell the world what happened, but more importantly, always to accuse everybody that had the power to do something that didn't. That accusation should always remain there, in the hope that the next group of leadership will remember that and would not want to be kept in that school of the failures and would want to try and act to do something different.
The judgment of history will be severe.
I would hope so, and I hope that these photographs
But do you think it changes anything?
Well, I do actually. I think that Kosovo was a good example. I think that the conflict in Kosovo was relatively low-key in terms of relative to Bosnia and Croatia, and that by the time we'd reached maybe about 1,000 people being killed, the world attention was incredibly high. And I think that the fact that myself and my colleagues were once again showing images, the same images we had seen since 1991, I think that the tolerance for this was very low, and that the world leaders said, you know, enough is enough, we're going to act much faster now. This new sort of concept of humanitarian intervention comes in. And I think that it helped. I think that the Kosovars benefited from the experiences of the Bosnians. And I think, like, East Timor happened even faster because of what happened with Kosovo. So I think, yeah, it does help, but it takes a long time.
What do you want to do now?
I want to keep doing this. I think it's
But going
important.
where people are dying and going where there's conflict and
Well,
war and strife
and history.
And
It's,
history.
You know, history is being made primarily in places of conflict. And I find that, one, for myself, incredibly interesting, but also incredibly important to document it.
During the war, what's life like for you when you're there?
Well, it varies from situation to situation. The biggest benefit I have is that I have money. And with money, things become a lot easier. Gasoline is more available, food is more available. I still am under fire and being shelled like everybody else, like in Sarajevo, but my life is certainly a lot better. And I always have the ability to leave, as opposed to many of the other people. But, you know, journalists really paid a price in Yugoslavia. Over 60 journalists were killed, more there than in any other war. And that's something that, you know, always preys on your mind. And we were always arrested every day, and there's lots of problems dealing with day-to-day situations.
Blood and Honey, a Balkan War Journal by Ron Haviv, essays by Chuck Sedetic and David Reif, and Afterward by Bernard Kouchner, who is back now in Paris as health minister.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us. See you next time. Journalist to cover the wars in the Balkans. His new book, Blood and Honey, a Balkan War Journal, collects some of his most powerful images from his 10 years there. I am pleased to have him here at this table for the first time. Welcome.
Thank you very much.
This is a powerful series of photographs. Let me just begin to show them, and then we can come back and talk about a career. Take a look at this first still, and you will see what we talk about. Here is this. Take me back to the time you shot this photograph.
People being arrested. And I was with a colleague, and we decided that we were going to follow the candidates no matter what. We were going to stick with them because we thought if something happened to them, that would be the most important thing. And as the day went on, I wound up being one of the only few journalists that wound up with the candidates at the end of the day. And we wound up at a park surrounded by military. Gunshots were going off, and all of a sudden a group of paramilitary guys come running up a hill with flags and batons and bats and small pistols, and they came charging towards us, guns fired. Well, this was in 1989. Noriega had declared elections to tell the world that he was democratically elected. They held the elections. Noriega lost the elections. He then nullified the elections. The following day, the candidates that won decided to take to the streets to basically get the people out to show that they were upset, that they were ready to put Noriega out of power. And a lot of things started happening, fighting in the streets, tear gas, gunshots. People.
At the age of 24, Ron Haviv shot the photograph that launched his career as a photojournalist. It was an image of a bloodied political candidate in Panama, and it landed on the covers of Time, Newsweek, and U.S. News and World Report. Since then, he has covered the fall of the Berlin Wall, cocaine wars in Colombia, refugees in Rwanda, and political upheaval in Haiti. He was also one of the first photojournalists.
The vice presidential candidate jumped into a car. His bodyguard jumped after him. The president was able to, the president-elect was able to escape. And they went to the car where the vice president was hiding, and they fired a pistol into the car and killed his bodyguard, who was lying on top of him, protecting him. They then dragged him out of the car. And I was hiding on the street, and I saw this man being brought out, and I didn't even recognize who it was, and I ran over to him and started photographing him.